My name is Dolores Quinn Albright. I'm 83 years old now, and they call me Miss D in Millstone, a quiet little town tucked away in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. People here know me as the midwife who has helped bring over 2,000 children into this world. My white hair is always neatly tied into a bun, my hands still steady enough to soothe a crying baby. I may seem like just another elderly woman, but there's a part of my story that I've kept hidden from the world for a long time. You see, there's a part of my past that I can't erase. A hell that I lived through as a teenager. A hell created not by a stranger, but by my own grandfather. A man who was once respected, a pillar of the community, but who, as the years went by, was transformed by a cruel disease that took his mind and twisted it. And my family? They asked me to just smile and accept it when his hands began to roam over my body, not seeing me as his granddaughter, but as his dead wife, Eunice. I was born in 1941 in a simple clapboard house on the edge of Millstone. The house was set apart from the small downtown area, almost at the county line. It was an old construction, with thick walls that kept the house cool even during the hottest summer days. My mother grew potatoes, corn, beans, and medicinal herbs in our large backyard. She knew the plants like the back of her hand, and it was from her that I learned the healing ways of the Appalachian Mountains. My father, Jerome, worked in the coal mines. Like so many men in the region, he would leave before sunrise and return home covered in black dust. His calloused hands would often bring me small rocks and minerals as gifts, and my collection of coal and minerals became one of my greatest treasures. My mother, Isabella, wasn't an official midwife, but she helped with difficult births when called. She taught me everything I know about herbal remedies, about the cycles of the moon, and how to understand the women's bodies in ways that no textbook could explain. My childhood was simple, but it was full of love. I would run free along mountain trails, swim in the creek, help my mother with her plants, and listen to the fantastic stories my father told about the hidden treasures left behind by the first pioneers who settled here. Despite the hardships we faced, we never went hungry, and our house was always filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and herbal teas. It was a life full of purpose and connection to the land, and I felt safe and loved. But that peace, that innocence would end in 1956 when I was just 15 years old. That was the year my grandfather Abraham came to live with us. Before that, I didn't know my grandfather very well. He lived downtown with my grandmother, Eunice, and we would visit them on special occasions. He had once owned a small hardware store, and was a respected deacon at the local Baptist church. He had always been a man of strong moral values and a rigid temperament. But after my grandmother passed away in 1951, things started to change. First, it was small things. He would forget where he put his keys, or the name of an old customer, or whether he'd already had lunch. Then came the more serious things. He left the stove on, went outside in his pajamas, and accused the housekeeper of stealing things that he had misplaced himself. It wasn't long before he almost set fire to the house by forgetting a candle near the curtains. That's when my father decided it was no longer safe for him to live alone. "He needs constant care," my father said one evening, his voice tired from a long day. "He's going to come live with us." None of us could have imagined how things would change after Grandpa arrived. But my father's decision was final. Grandpa moved in with us that April, bringing with him only a few suitcases and a vacant look in his eyes. It wasn't long before I started to notice the changes in him. At first they were small, harmless. He would confuse names, ask the same questions repeatedly, and sometimes speak to my mother as though she was a housekeeper instead of his daughter-in-law. "It's the disease," my father would explain tiredly. "It's not his fault." But the real changes came slowly, creeping in unnoticed, until one day I realized they were no longer small, harmless moments. They were something much darker. The first time I noticed it, we were sitting around the dinner table. Grandpa, his head slightly tilted to the side, suddenly stopped eating and fixed his gaze on me. "Eunice," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in days. "Why did you cut your hair? I always liked it long." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. My hair was tied in a long braid down my back, just as it always was. I hadn't cut it at all. My father cleared his throat. "Dad, this is Dolores, your granddaughter. Mom passed away, remember?" Grandpa blinked a few times. Then his face twisted into an expression of deep sadness. Of course. Eunice is gone.
I'm sorry.
He returned to eating, but for the rest of the night I could feel his eyes on me. It was as though he was seeing something, or someone else. And that's when I began to feel it. The shift. Something was not right. In the days that followed, it happened more and more frequently. I'd be helping my mother in the kitchen, or sweeping the yard, and I'd hear Grandpa's voice. Eunice, have you seen my pipe? Or Eunice, come sit here with me. Every time my parents would gently correct him, and he would seem momentarily confused, then accept the correction. But the more it happened, the more I began to feel like I was living in a world that wasn't mine. And that's when the real nightmare began. The first time I truly understood something was wrong was when Grandpa Abraham called me Eunice in front of the whole family. It wasn't the first time he'd confused our names, but this time it was different. His voice wasn't frail and uncertain like before. It was strong, clear, and the words seemed deliberate. When he looked at me, it wasn't the confused gaze of the old man I had grown up with. It was the focused, piercing gaze of someone seeing not me, but a long-dead woman who had once been his wife. Why did you cut your hair? Grandpa asked me, his eyes studying me like I was an unfamiliar stranger. The room went quiet. My father looked up at me, brow furrowed, before correcting him gently. Dad, this is Dolores, your granddaughter. Mom passed away, remember? Grandpa blinked twice, as though trying to clear the fog in his mind. He let out a deep sigh, shaking his head as if to apologize. Of course. I'm sorry, Eunice. He trailed off and then went back to eating as though nothing had happened. The rest of the night was tense. The silence that hung in the air was uncomfortable, as if something unspoken was creeping into the edges of the room, just beyond our reach. But the strange part was that I couldn't shake the feeling that he had truly seen her, not me. There was a shift in the air, a distinct change, and I couldn't help but feel that something terrible was just beginning. Over the next few weeks it only got worse. I would be sitting in the living room reading or doing chores, and I'd hear Grandpa's voice, low and tentative, calling out, Eunice, have you seen my pipe? Or, Eunice, come sit with me for a moment. Sometimes he'd say things that made my blood run cold, like, why are you wearing that dress? It's not like the one I bought you when we first married. It wasn't just the confusion. It was something deeper. Something unsettling. One afternoon, when my parents went to town to gather supplies, I found myself alone with him for the first time in weeks. It was a warm, bright day, and I was preparing lunch in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, my mind busy with the usual thoughts of what needed to be done next. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. Familiar, but not right. Eunice. Grandpa's voice came again, this time different. It wasn't the confused rambling of a sick old man. No, this was stronger, firmer, almost youthful. You look beautiful today. I froze, the knife in my hand shaking slightly as I turned around. There he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes fixated on me with a kind of intense scrutiny. His gaze didn't wander, but moved steadily from my face down to my body. It was not the soft, gentle look of a grandfather admiring his granddaughter. It was the look of a man who desired something. Something I was terrified of. Grandpa, it's me, Dolores. I stammered, my heart racing. You're confusing me again. He smiled then, but it wasn't a smile I knew. It wasn't kind. It was a smile that belonged to someone else, someone with intent. Don't be silly, Eunice, he said with a wink. I know it's you. I would recognize you anywhere. He stepped closer. A chill ran through me as I backed away. My back hit the kitchen table, but there was no escaping now. His presence towered over me. Grandpa, I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm. Please, this isn't right. But it didn't matter. He wasn't hearing me. He was lost in his own world, seeing things that weren't there, thinking I was someone I wasn't. I've missed you, Eunice, he muttered as he took a step forward, his hand reaching out to touch my face. My stomach turned. I felt my legs weaken, my body frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. This wasn't my grandfather. The man who had raised me, the man who told me stories of old times, the man who had once been strong and dignified, he was gone. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to push him away, but I couldn't. He was frail, old, and sick. He didn't know what he was doing, right? But he had to know. He had to know what was wrong. I couldn't just let it happen again. Grandpa, stop. I cried, my voice breaking. I'm your granddaughter. This isn't right. For a moment he seemed confused, blinking rapidly, like he was waking from a dream. Then just as quickly the confusion cleared, and he looked at me with a kind of understanding that terrified me even more. Eunice, he said softly, almost pleading. You've changed. Why are you acting like this? I felt trapped, cornered. I backed away, the panic rising in my chest. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a kitchen knife, the handle cold in my trembling hands. I didn't know what I planned to do with it, but I couldn't let him get any closer. Grandpa, please. I begged again, my voice trembling. You can't do this. I'm Dolores, your granddaughter. Please understand. It was then that I heard footsteps coming from the front door. My parents, my brothers, they were finally home. I looked over my shoulder, relief flooding my body as I saw my father walk in, his face full of confusion at the scene before him. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes flicking between me and Grandpa. Grandpa turned to my father, suddenly looking small, confused again. She's just acting strange today, he said, his voice weak. I don't know what's happening. My father stepped forward, his hand gently guiding Grandpa out of the kitchen. Come on, Dad. Let's go sit down. It's okay. I stood there, my heart still racing, staring at the space Grandpa had occupied. The room felt cold, empty. A sense of dread lingered in the air, like something unspeakable had just happened, but no one acknowledged it. My father looked at me for a long time, but all he said was, "It's the disease, Dolores." He's not himself. He was right, of course. Grandpa wasn't himself. But I wasn't so sure anymore if it was just the disease, or if it was something else. Something darker, deeper. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. I couldn't keep living in fear. But the question was, how could I make my family understand? It was a warm May afternoon when everything changed. The storm clouds rolled in later that day, but there was no storm that could match the one brewing inside me. My family was gone, my father and brothers out in the fields, my mother to the creek to wash clothes, and I was left alone with Grandpa, just like the many times before. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of the wind outside. I had no idea what was coming. I was busy preparing lunch, chopping vegetables for the stew, lost in thought. But then I heard it again, his voice. Eunice, he called out, softer than before, almost seductive. Come here, I want to talk to you. I froze for a moment, the knife still in my hand, trembling. There was something about the way he said my name. His voice low, almost hushed, that made my stomach twist. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. He stood in the doorway looking different. There was no confusion in his eyes anymore. He was staring at me with an intensity that sent a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't the vacant stare of the old man I had grown up with. It was a gaze that carried something else. Something more unsettling. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My breath caught in my throat. Grandpa, it's me, Dolores. What's wrong? He smiled at me, but it wasn't a smile I recognized. It wasn't kind or reassuring. It was the kind of smile that felt wrong. He took a step toward me, his hands outstretched, and that was when I knew. I knew what he wanted. He wanted something I could never give him. No, Grandpa, I said, backing away instinctively, my hands raised in front of me. This isn't right. I'm your granddaughter. You're confusing me again. But it didn't matter. His eyes never wavered. He reached out and touched my face, his rough hand lingering on my skin. It was as if he didn't even see me. He saw someone else. His late wife, Eunice. You've always been so beautiful, he murmured, his breath hot against my skin. His touch was cold, unfamiliar, and it made my body go rigid with fear. I tried to back away, but the table was in the way. My heart raced as I looked for something, anything to defend myself with. I was frozen. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but I couldn't make sense of any of them. He was my grandfather, an old man sick with disease. He couldn't possibly know what he was doing, could he? But I knew better now. He wasn't confused. He wasn't just lost in his memories. He had a purpose, and that purpose was to use me in ways that no one should ever use another person. Stop, Grandpa! I shouted, but my voice was small and trembled with fear. I took a step back and grabbed the nearest thing. A wooden spoon, the only thing within reach. Don't touch me, I said, holding the spoon out like a weapon, trying to create some kind of barrier between us. But he only laughed, a low, cruel chuckle. "You're being silly, Eunice," he said, his voice deepening, as though it was someone else speaking entirely. "We've been married for so long, and you're acting like we're strangers." His hands moved to my waist then, as though it were a casual gesture. I pushed him away, stumbling back, my mind scrambling for something, anything, to stop him from touching me. "Grandpa, please," I begged, my heart hammering in my chest. "I'm not her. I'm Dolores. You're confusing me with your wife again." But he didn't stop. He didn't seem to hear me. I felt his hands moving, grabbing, pulling me toward him. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I was trapped in my own home with the man who had once been the protector of our family. And then something broke inside me. I couldn't stand it anymore. With all the strength I had left, I pushed him away, stumbling to my feet. I ran toward the door, desperate to get out, to escape, but I was trapped. The door was too far and Grandpa was too close. I grabbed the nearest thing to me, a heavy iron skillet sitting on the stove. I turned and held it in front of me, shaking with fear, with anger, with the horror of what was happening. "Stay back," I screamed, holding the skillet like a shield. But Grandpa didn't seem to understand. His expression didn't change, though he paused, surprised by my resistance. For a moment I saw something like confusion flicker in his eyes, but then the moment passed, and he took a step forward again. "Eunice, why are you so angry?" he asked, his voice soft, almost pleading. "We've always been so close. You know how much I love you." The words made me sick. How could he say that? How could he speak of love when he was treating me like this? I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't fight him. But I didn't have to. The door opened just then, and I heard the sound of my father's voice in the hallway, calling out to me. "Dolores? What's going on?" At the sound of my father's voice, I felt a rush of relief. I dropped the skillet, my arms falling to my sides, my legs shaking beneath me. Grandpa, now seeing my father, seemed to snap out of the trance. His expression changed again, becoming the confused, frail look that I had grown used to. He stepped back, his hands shaking. "Jerome, she's acting strange," he said, his voice weak and distant. "She's yelling at me, she's threatening me." My father's face turned pale as he looked between me and Grandpa. His eyes were filled with confusion, fear, and something else, guilt. "Dad, this is Dolores," my father said slowly, his voice strained. "Your granddaughter. You're confused." Grandpa blinked a few times as if trying to wake up from a dream, and then nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. He let my father guide him back to his room, muttering under his breath, still calling me Eunice. I stood there, my body trembling, unable to move. The weight of what had just happened sank into my bones like a heavy stone. It wasn't just the confusion anymore. It was something worse. Something darker. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to scream, to run away from it all. But another part of me felt utterly numb, as though I had already lost everything, and nothing else could touch me. My father turned to me, his face pale and tight. "Dolores," he began, his voice low, but I couldn't hear the words. They didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. That night I didn't sleep. The darkness felt suffocating, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The days that followed that horrific afternoon felt like I was walking through a fog, my feet heavy, my mind clouded. I couldn't shake the feeling of Grandpa's hands on me, or the sickening way he looked at me like I was someone else. But what haunted me even more was the silence. No one spoke about what had happened. Not my parents, not my brothers, not anyone in the house. It was as though the whole incident never took place, swept away under a blanket of unspoken words. They continued to treat me with a kind of distance, but not one that offered comfort. It was as if they couldn't quite look at me, couldn't fully face the reality of what had occurred. My mother, always the picture of calm, would catch my eye every now and then, but her gaze was filled with something else, guilt. I could see it in the way her hands shook when she poured my tea, or in the way her voice quivered when she asked how I was. But she never asked me what had happened. She never asked me what I needed. And my father, who had once been my protector, the man who was supposed to shield me from harm, never mentioned the incident. Not once. He just went on with his routine, going to the mines every morning, coming home every evening covered in dust. He would glance at me occasionally, but it was always with that same awkward, uncomfortable silence. It was clear that he didn't want to confront the truth. At night, I would lie in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to push away the horror of what had happened. But the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger the memories became. I couldn't escape the feeling that the whole world was looking the other way, avoiding the truth because it was too ugly, too painful to face. The worst part was that I felt completely alone. I couldn't turn to anyone for help. The people who should have protected me, the ones I loved, were all turning a blind eye. They were pretending that everything was okay, as if nothing had changed, as if I wasn't quietly falling apart inside. I knew what my family was doing. They were pretending it was just a moment of confusion, a misunderstanding. They wanted to believe that Grandpa was simply sick, that his disease had caused him to act out in ways that weren't his fault. They wanted to tell themselves that this wasn't as bad as it seemed, that it was just a result of his illness, a disease that they couldn't control. But deep down I knew better. It wasn't just the disease. Grandpa's actions went far beyond confusion. He wasn't just forgetting things or mixing up names. He was actively trying to harm me, and my family was letting him. They were protecting him, making excuses for his behavior, and in doing so they were neglecting me. They were letting this happen to me. I couldn't understand it. How could they ignore the pain I was in? How could they let this go on day after day without doing something? But I couldn't say it aloud. I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't confront them because I knew what would happen. They would turn it back on me, make me feel like I was the one at fault. That somehow it was my fault that Grandpa was sick. That it was my fault he had confused me with his dead wife. And so the silence continued. The unspoken words hung in the air, suffocating me, making me feel small and invisible. The family went on as if nothing had happened, but I was suffocating inside. I couldn't breathe under the weight of their denial, their unwillingness to confront what was happening right under their noses. It wasn't just my family that was guilty, though. The whole town of Millstone seemed to have turned a blind eye. People knew what was happening to me, but no one said anything. No one offered help. They saw Grandpa's confusion and turned away, thinking it was just an old man's illness. No one spoke up. No one confronted the truth. They all wanted to live in their small, comfortable world, where nothing ever disrupted the peaceful image of their community. They wanted to believe that this kind of thing didn't happen in their town. I began to see it for what it was, a collective silence, a refusal to face uncomfortable truths. It wasn't just my family that had failed me. It was the entire community. They had all chosen to look the other way. They didn't want to acknowledge the possibility that someone in their own town, someone they respected, could be capable of such a thing. And it wasn't just the people around me. It was society as a whole. The way women and children were silenced, their pain dismissed. The way our voices were never heard, our suffering ignored. Because it was easier to live in denial than to confront the uncomfortable reality that abuse happens behind closed doors. That it's not just the big, obvious monsters we need to worry about. It's the ones who wear the mask of a respected elder, a family member, a loved one. It's the quiet acceptance of abuse that continues to thrive in the shadows. I realized then that the silence wasn't just my family's fault. It was a societal problem. It was the way we were taught to ignore the pain of others, to look away when something uncomfortable happens. It was the way women and children were expected to accept abuse in silence, to pretend like everything was fine when it wasn't. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't live like this, trapped in this suffocating silence. I knew I had to speak out. I had to do something, even if it meant breaking the silence that had held me hostage for so long. I had to find a way to make my voice heard, to confront the truth, even if it meant losing everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sky was gray with an impending storm. I sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I twisted a cloth in my lap. The air in the house was thick with the tension that had been building up for weeks, months, maybe even years. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when I knew the truth, that my own grandfather, the man who had once been a pillar of our community, had turned into something unrecognizable, something terrifying. And my family, my own flesh and blood, were too afraid to face it. That afternoon, I sat waiting for my father and brothers to return from the fields. My mother was in the garden, picking herbs, and Grandpa was napping in his room. I had been trying to focus on the small tasks of the day, but my mind kept racing. The weight of everything I had been through. The fear, the isolation, the constant dread was becoming unbearable. It felt as if my entire world was crumbling around me, but no one else could see it. No one else could hear the silent screams I had been carrying inside me. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't pretend that nothing was wrong. I couldn't live in this house, trapped by the suffocating silence, knowing that my own family had failed to protect me. I had tried to tell them, I had tried to make them understand, but they had all turned away, each one too afraid to confront the reality of what was happening. It wasn't just Grandpa's disease. It was the silence, the fear, the unwillingness to face the truth. And it was killing me. Slowly, piece by piece, it was killing me. So I made a decision. I would take a stand. I would make my voice heard no matter the cost. When my father and brothers returned from the fields, I was waiting for them. I stood in the kitchen, facing the door, my hands gripping the edges of the table. They stepped inside, covered in dust and sweat, the usual sounds of their arrival filling the space. But today it felt different. Today I wasn't just Dolores the granddaughter. I wasn't just the quiet girl who did what she was told and kept her head down. Today I was going to speak my truth. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling at first but gaining strength with each word, "we need to talk." My father, who had always been the one to command respect in the household, paused. He looked at me, confusion in his eyes. "What is it, Dolores?" I took a deep breath. I can't live like this anymore. I can't pretend like nothing is happening. Grandpa? My voice caught in my throat, but I pushed forward, determined to say it to make him understand. Grandpa isn't just sick. He's hurting me. He's been hurting me, and you've all ignored it. You've all let it happen. The room went silent. My father's face went pale, his hands dropping to his sides as if he couldn't comprehend what I was saying. My brothers stood frozen in the doorway, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. "No," my father said, shaking his head slowly.
No, Dolores.
"That's not. Don't lie to me," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my words. "You know what's been happening. You know he's been calling me Eunice, looking at me like I'm her, touching me, trying to treat me like his wife. You know, and you've done nothing." My father flinched as if my words had physically struck him. "Dolores, please. You're confused. It's the disease. It's not him. He doesn't know what he's doing." "No," I cried, stepping forward. "You're the one who doesn't know what's happening. He's not confused. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's using the disease as an excuse, but he's not confused. He's taking advantage of me." There was a long pause, and then my father took a step back, as though the weight of my words had knocked the air out of him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and shame. My brothers were still silent, looking at each other as if trying to make sense of what they were hearing. "Dolores, please," my father whispered. We never. You never protected me," I shouted, tears streaming down my face now. "You never protected me, Dad. You never did anything when I asked you for help. All you did was make excuses, make him feel better. And now it's too late." My father's shoulders slumped. He looked at me with such a mixture of guilt and sorrow that for a moment, I almost believed he was truly seeing me for the first time. "I never thought," he started, but his voice trailed off, as if he couldn't find the words. "I thought he was just sick. I thought—" "No," I interrupted, my voice shaking with the weight of the truth. "You didn't want to think. You didn't want to see it. It's easier to pretend everything's fine, isn't it, Dad? It's easier to pretend Grandpa's illness is an excuse for everything. But it's not. And I'm done pretending." My father stood there, his face crumpling, the weight of my words sinking in. He looked at me, then at my brothers, who both had their eyes cast downward. It was clear they didn't know how to react, didn't know what to say. For a moment the world stood still. All the years of silence, of unspoken truths, seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on all of us. And then slowly my father spoke again, his voice barely a whisper.
"I'm sorry, Dolores."
"I didn't know. I should have done something. I should have protected you." I couldn't respond. I couldn't say anything. The weight of his apology was too much, too late. My heart felt heavy, as if I was carrying a burden I had no strength to hold. I had wanted him to protect me. I had wanted him to stand up and do the right thing. But he hadn't. And that truth, that realization, hurt more than anything else. Do you understand now? I asked quietly, my voice soft, broken. Do you understand what he did to me? He nodded slowly, his face full of shame. Yes, Dolores. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. There was no going back to the way things had been. No amount of apologies could undo the trauma. No amount of words could fix what had been broken inside me. I don't know what comes next, I said, my voice trembling. But I can't stay here with him. I can't stay under the same roof with someone who did that to me. My father's face twisted in sorrow, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort him. Not now. Not after everything. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice full of determination. We'll make sure he gets the care he needs. I'll take care of this. I'll make sure it never happens again. I nodded, though the words didn't make me feel any better. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to fix the years of pain and neglect. The next few days felt like I was in some kind of haze, moving through my life but never quite touching it. My mind kept going back to the horrifying events of that afternoon, and I couldn't seem to shake the images of Grandpa's hands on me, his voice low and insistent. It was all a blur of confusion and fear, and I couldn't escape it no matter how hard I tried. But the hardest part was yet to come. My father had promised that things would change, that Grandpa would get the care he needed. But there was still the matter of confronting him, of making him face the truth of what he had done. My father had insisted that I be the one to talk to Grandpa, to let him know that what he had done was not acceptable, that I wouldn't tolerate it anymore. The idea of confronting him made my stomach churn. I had spent so many years hiding from the truth, trying to bury it deep inside me. And now I had to face it head on. I couldn't avoid it any longer. One evening, my father asked me to meet him in the living room. I knew what was coming. He had already talked to Grandpa, and now it was time for me to say my piece. I stood in front of the door to Grandpa's room, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were cold, my body tense, as if I were about to step into a battle I didn't know how to fight. Come in, Dolores. My father's voice came from inside. It was softer than usual, as if he were trying to offer me some kind of comfort. But I knew it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. I walked into the room and saw Grandpa sitting on the bed, his face as blank as ever. He looked up at me, confusion flickering in his eyes as he stared at me for a moment. Eunice, he asked, his voice a little more uncertain than usual. Why are you looking at me like that? My breath caught in my throat. I could feel my father standing behind me, his presence a silent reminder that this moment would define everything. No, Grandpa, I said, my voice steady but strained. It's me, Dolores. Your granddaughter. He blinked a few times, as if he were trying to make sense of what I was saying. He shook his head slightly and then looked at me again, a glimmer of recognition crossing his face. You're my granddaughter, Dolores? He asked, his voice faltering. Yes, Grandpa, I replied, taking a deep breath. I'm your granddaughter, and we need to talk about what happened. He seemed to grow smaller in front of me, his confusion deepening. What happened? He asked, his voice quiet. I took another deep breath, gathering all the strength I had left. You've been confusing me with Eunice. You've been treating me like her, and that's not okay. It's not okay to touch me like that, Grandpa. His face went pale, and he stared at me as if I had just struck him. What are you talking about? He whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to. I know you didn't mean to, I said quickly, my voice shaking with emotion. But that doesn't make it right. You're not seeing me for who I am. You're seeing your dead wife, and that's not okay. Grandpa's face twisted in confusion and pain. He looked down at his hands, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But then he looked back up at me, and the blankness returned. I didn't mean to hurt you, he whispered. I just miss her so much. She was my everything. I know you miss her, Grandpa, I said softly, my heart breaking for the man he used to be. But I'm not her. I'm Dolores. and you can't treat me this way." He seemed to shrink under my words. His shoulders hunched as if the weight of my accusation was too much for him to bear. He looked at my father, then back at me. His eyes filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. "I'm sorry, Dolores," he murmured. "I didn't mean to do anything wrong. It's the disease. It's the disease that's making me do this." I shook my head. "It's not just the disease. The disease may make you confused, but it doesn't make you do things you wouldn't normally do. You know what's wrong, Grandpa, and you have to understand that you can't keep doing this." My father finally spoke up, his voice low and firm. "We've all been too afraid to face the truth, but it's time we do. Dolores is right. What happened isn't just about the disease. It's about what you've done, and we can't ignore it anymore." Grandpa's face crumpled, and he looked down at his hands again. For a long moment he said nothing, as if the weight of everything he had done had finally settled on his shoulders. Then in a voice so small I could barely hear it, he whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt you, Dolores. I never wanted to hurt anyone." My father put a hand on Grandpa's shoulder, his voice gentle. "We're going to make sure you get the care you need, Dad. We'll take you to Charleston, to a place where they can help you." Grandpa nodded silently, his face a mixture of sorrow and confusion. He seemed lost, as though he didn't know who he was anymore. And I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Even though he had hurt me, the disease had taken him, twisted him into something he wasn't. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't let him use that as an excuse anymore. "We'll take care of you," my father said, his voice softer now. "But Dolores and the rest of us need to heal too. We need to move forward." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to move on from this. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by what had happened. I would heal, and I would make sure that no one else had to endure the same kind of pain I had. The days following the confrontation with Grandpa were a blur of emotions and quiet tension. My father took Grandpa to Charleston, to the facility that could provide him with the care and treatment he needed, and for that I felt a small sense of relief. But the weight of what had happened hung heavily in the air. My father had promised that things would change, but I knew that nothing would ever truly be the same again. I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just the abuse that had hurt me. It was the fact that my family had failed me when I needed them most. They had let it happen, ignored my cries for help, and protected a man who had taken advantage of me. And now, as Grandpa was gone, I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I didn't expect my family to understand the depth of my pain. But what I hadn't expected was their reaction in the days that followed. They didn't rally around me. They didn't offer the comfort I had longed for. Instead, they remained silent, each of them trapped in their own guilt, unwilling to face what had happened. My mother, who had always been my rock, was strangely distant. I could see the pain in her eyes whenever she looked at me, but she said nothing. She seemed unsure of what to say, unsure of how to comfort me. It was as though she couldn't bear to acknowledge what had happened, and I couldn't understand why. She had known something was wrong long before I had confronted Grandpa, but still she said nothing. My father, too, seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. He would look at me with those sad eyes, as though he wanted to speak, but the words never came. The silence between us was deafening. For a man who had always been so confident, so certain of everything, he was now reduced to a shadow of his former self. I saw him retreat into himself, as though he was trying to escape the reality of what had happened under his roof. My brothers, John and Anthony, were no better. John, who had always been so protective of me, avoided eye contact. He would sometimes look at me, but then quickly look away, as if he couldn't bear the sight of my pain. Anthony, the youngest, was more confused than anything. He didn't understand what had happened, and I couldn't bring myself to explain it to him. He would ask me questions about what had gone on, but I would brush him off, unable to speak of it without breaking down. It wasn't until one evening, a week after Grandpa had been taken away, that I finally broke the silence. My father, after coming home from work, sat down beside me at the kitchen table. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at his hands as though lost in thought. Finally he spoke. "I don't know what to say, Dolores," he said, his voice strained. "I'm sorry. I should have known. I should have done something sooner. His apology was so much more than I expected, and yet it wasn't enough. The guilt in his voice was palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him, not yet. I wanted to say something, anything that would make him understand, make him see just how deeply he had failed me. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in silence, my anger bubbling beneath the surface, my heart heavy with the weight of everything we had lost. "Why didn't you protect me?" I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. My father looked at me, and the tears in his eyes made me feel like I was breaking all over again. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. I didn't expect him to fix everything with a simple apology, but I needed him to acknowledge the truth of what had happened. I needed him to understand that I was no longer the same person, that I couldn't just move on from this, not without healing first. "I'm so sorry, Dolores," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I don't know how I failed you. I can't change the past, but I promise I'll make it right. I'll do whatever it takes." I nodded, but deep down, I knew that it wasn't about making it right anymore. The damage had been done. The hurt, the betrayal, the silence, it had all cut too deep. And I couldn't forget it no matter how much I wanted to. I could see the guilt in his eyes, and I knew he felt it. He had been a part of the system that had allowed it to happen, even if he hadn't directly caused it. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. "What do we do?" My father sighed deeply, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "We move on, Dolores. We have to move on. We have to heal, all of us." I shook my head. "I don't know how to heal from this. I don't know how to forgive. How can I? You all failed me." My father's face fell, and I could see the anguish on his face as he stood up from the table, walking slowly to the window. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I failed you, Dolores. I didn't protect you like I should have. I didn't see it." "But you knew," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "You knew something was wrong. And still you did nothing." He didn't answer. He just stood there staring out the window, lost in his own thoughts. And I realized then that it wasn't just me who had been hurt. It was all of us. The weight of what had happened, the silence, the guilt, it was tearing us apart. My father finally turned back to face me. "We'll figure this out, Dolores," he said, his voice full of uncertainty. "We'll figure out how to heal, how to move forward. But it's going to take time." I didn't believe him. Time couldn't undo the damage that had been done. But I didn't have the heart to argue anymore. All I wanted was to feel safe again, to feel like I wasn't trapped in this nightmare any longer. That night I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house was suffocating, a constant reminder of what had happened. I could hear my father's quiet sobs from his room, the sound of his grief mixing with my own. The guilt, the shame, it wasn't just mine to carry anymore. It was all of ours. I wasn't sure what would come next. I wasn't sure if I would ever truly forgive my family. But I knew one thing for certain. The silence had to end. I couldn't stay silent anymore, and neither could they. Time has a strange way of dulling the sharpness of trauma, but it doesn't erase it. After Grandpa was sent away for treatment, I tried to go back to some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible. The world around me had changed forever. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the echoes of what had happened. My family was still distant, our house still heavy with the unspoken words. I could feel the gap between us widening every day, and the isolation, the loneliness started to suffocate me. I tried to escape into my work. I helped my mother with the herbs and the plants, but it didn't help. The past was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa's face. Every time I heard the creak of an old door, I felt his hands on me again. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't forget. It wasn't until I met Miss Louise, an older midwife who lived a few miles down the road, that I began to see a way forward. She was a wise woman, respected in the community, known for her knowledge of childbirth and women's health. When she came to my house one afternoon, asking my mother for help with some herbs, I saw something in her eyes that made me believe she understood the weight of my pain. It wasn't just a look of sympathy, it was a look of knowing. She had seen suffering before, and she knew how to heal. "Dolores," she said one evening after she had finished talking with my mother about herbs, "you have a gift that I can see in your hands. You have the touch of someone who can help bring life into this world." I stared at her, not understanding what she meant. My hands? I had never considered them special. They were callous from years of work, from helping my mother in the garden and around the house. They were strong but not elegant. Certainly not the hands of a healer. I don't understand, I said, confused. What do you mean? You have the touch of a midwife, she said simply. You understand the body, Dolores. You've seen the way women suffer, the way they endure. You know what it's like to be vulnerable, to need help, and to have your body, your soul, treated with disrespect. You can help other women, Dolores. You can help them heal. Her words hit me like a lightning bolt, and for the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me. A sense of purpose, something to grasp onto. I had always helped my mother with the herb remedies, always been fascinated by the way the body worked, the way life came into the world. But I had never thought of it as something I could do for others. I had never seen it as my calling. Yet somehow Miss Louise saw something in me that I had never seen in myself. Come with me, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I will teach you what I know. You have the hands of a healer, Dolores, and you can use them to help others. This is your path to healing. Not just for you, but for the women you will help. I didn't know if I believed her at the time, but I knew I had to try. The idea of becoming a midwife, of helping other women through childbirth, gave me a sense of control, a sense of power over something in my life that had felt completely out of my hands. Maybe it was the first step toward healing, toward reclaiming something I had lost. The training wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, but Miss Louise was patient with me. She taught me everything she knew: how to read the body, how to recognize signs of complications, how to ease a woman's pain with herbs, massage, and care. She taught me how to bring life into the world safely, and she taught me how to be strong for those women, how to guide them through one of the most vulnerable times of their lives. It wasn't just about physical healing, it was about emotional healing as well. Each time I helped a woman through labor, I felt a little of my own pain slip away. Every birth, every woman I helped was a small victory. It was like I was reclaiming a piece of myself, a piece of my power that had been stolen from me. In the process, I found that helping others gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't realized I needed. It gave me a way to transform my own suffering into something meaningful, something that could help others heal. As the months passed, word spread about my work. At first, it was just a few women in our small town who came to me for help. But as my reputation grew, more and more women sought me out, not just from Millstone but from the surrounding areas. They came to me because they trusted me, because they felt safe with me. I became known as the young midwife, the one who understood, the one who cared. It was during this time that I began to realize that my work as a midwife was not just about delivering babies. It was about creating a space for women to be heard, to be seen, and to be valued. Every woman who came to me, whether it was for advice, a birth, or just a listening ear, had a story to tell. And I realized that the act of listening, of truly hearing them, was just as important as the physical care I provided. I had been silenced for so long, my own story buried deep inside me. But through my work, I learned how to give women a voice, to help them share their stories and heal from their own traumas. It was the most rewarding part of my work. One evening, after a particularly difficult birth, I sat with Miss Louise, reflecting on the journey I had taken. She looked at me with pride in her eyes. "You've done it, Dolores," she said, her voice full of approval. "You've turned your pain into something beautiful. You're healing others, and in the process, you're healing yourself." For the first time in a long time, I felt it. A sense of peace, a sense of purpose. Maybe I couldn't change what had happened to me, but I could use my experiences to help others. And in doing so, I was finally starting to heal. As the years went by, my life slowly began to reshape itself. The darkness of my past, though never fully gone, began to fade into the background, replaced by the light of something new. Purpose, strength, and the power of healing. My work as a midwife became more than just a career. It became a mission, a way of turning my suffering into something meaningful. But even as I helped others bring life into the world, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that my own journey was still unfinished. I had learned to navigate my trauma. The nightmares still came uninvited, creeping up on me in the quiet moments when my guard was down. But I had learned how to handle them, how to breathe through the fear, how to steady my pulse, how to remind myself that I had survived. I had found peace in the rhythm of my work, in the steady flow of helping others, and in the quiet moments I shared with the women I helped. I had found strength in listening, in giving others the space to speak their truths, knowing that I had a part to play in their healing. In the early 1960s, after I had gained a reputation as a skilled midwife, I decided to take the next step in my journey. I wanted to create a place where women could come together, a safe space for healing, where they could share their stories without fear of judgment or silence. I rented a small room behind Mr. Gerald's pharmacy, a modest space, but it was mine. The space was nothing extravagant, just enough to fit an examination table, some shelves for my herbs and tools, and a few chairs for women to sit and talk. It was a simple room, but it became a sanctuary. I named it the Women's House, and word spread quickly. Women came from all over, not just from Millstone but from nearby towns, seeking help, advice, or just a sympathetic ear. The stories they shared were heartbreaking and familiar. Stories of abuse, betrayal, isolation, and pain. But there was something else in those stories too. Resilience, strength, and the unbreakable will to survive. Through the Women's House, I began to see the true scope of what had happened to me, and to so many others. I realized that I wasn't alone in my suffering, that my trauma, as painful as it had been, was part of a much larger pattern. I wasn't the only woman whose voice had been silenced, whose body had been treated as something to be controlled. I wasn't the only one who had suffered at the hands of someone they should have been able to trust. And with that realization came a profound sense of responsibility. I had spent so many years running from my pain, hiding from my memories, and now I realized that I could use my experiences to help others. I could be the one to give them a voice, to help them reclaim their power, just as I had begun to reclaim mine. The work wasn't always easy. Some days I felt overwhelmed by the weight of the stories I heard, the pain I saw in the women who came to me for help. But each time I helped a woman, each time I guided her through labor or helped her find a solution to her struggles, I felt a piece of my own heart heal. I realized that my purpose wasn't just to bring life into the world. It was to help people find healing, to help women rediscover their own strength, their own voices. The more I worked, the more my reputation spread. I wasn't just a midwife anymore. I had become a symbol of empowerment for women in Millstone and beyond. My name became known in the surrounding counties, and women began to seek me out, not just for childbirth, but for advice on relationships, health, and personal struggles. The Women's House became a place where women could come together, share their experiences, and support each other through difficult times. In the mid-1960s, I was approached by a group of women from a neighboring town who had heard about my work. They asked me to come and speak to their community about women's health, childbirth, and personal empowerment. I was hesitant at first. Public speaking was never my forte, but something inside me told me that this was my chance to make a difference on a larger scale. So I agreed. That first talk was nerve-wracking. My hands shook as I stood in front of the group, but as I spoke, I could feel the connection I had with the women in the room. I shared my own story, and in doing so, I began to realize that my pain had given me a unique perspective, a way to relate to the women I was helping. I wasn't just telling them what to do or how to give birth, I was telling them that I understood, that I had walked a similar path, and that I had found a way to heal. The response was overwhelming. The women in the audience came up to me afterward, sharing their own stories, expressing their gratitude for giving them a voice. That was the moment I realized that my journey wasn't just about healing myself. It was about helping others heal, too. It was about giving women the tools to reclaim their lives, their bodies, and their voices. The more I spoke, the more I began to build a network of women who supported each other, who shared knowledge and resources. I became involved in local women's health initiatives, advocating for better care, better resources, and more support for women in rural communities. I worked with local midwives, doctors, and nurses to create a comprehensive network of care for women in the Appalachian region, and slowly but surely, the Women's House expanded. In 1968, I officially opened the Appalachian Valley Women's Health Center, a facility that combined traditional midwifery practices with modern medical care. It was a place where women could receive prenatal care, childbirth assistance, and postnatal care, but it was also a place for them to find emotional support, to share their stories, and to heal. I worked tirelessly to make the center a success, and over the years, it became a model for other rural health centers in the country. But my work didn't stop there. As I began to expand the center, I started to train young midwives, passing on the knowledge and wisdom I had gained from my own experiences and from the women who had come before me. I wanted to ensure that the next generation of women had the tools they needed to take control of their health and their bodies, just as I had. As the center grew, I began to see my legacy taking shape. It wasn't just about the women I helped, it was about the women who would continue the work after me. I knew that my time was limited, but I also knew that the foundation I had built would live on, that the impact of the Women's House and the health center would continue to touch lives for generations to come. And so I continued my work, day by day, helping women, teaching midwives, advocating for change, and creating a space where women could find healing. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the weight of my past would catch up to me, but I had found a purpose. I had found a way to take my pain and turn it into something beautiful. I may have started this journey as a broken girl, hiding from my past, but I had transformed into a woman who was stronger than I had ever imagined. My story had become not just my own, but a story of survival, empowerment, and healing that I shared with every woman I helped. By the early 1970s, the Appalachian Valley Women's Health Center had grown into a hub for women in the region. It wasn't just about midwifery anymore. We offered a comprehensive range of services, from prenatal care to women's health education to mental health support. We became known for our holistic approach, combining modern medicine with the wisdom passed down through generations of Appalachian women. It wasn't just about bringing babies into the world. It was about empowering women to take control of their health, to have a voice, and to claim their space in a world that often tried to silence them. As the center expanded, so did my reach. I began traveling to other communities in West Virginia, and eventually to neighboring states, speaking to women about the importance of self-care, the significance of trusting their own bodies, and the strength that could be found in a community of women. I was invited to conferences, to workshops, and to panels where I could share my experiences and my knowledge. My work as a midwife had evolved from a personal mission to a movement, one that transcended the boundaries of the mountains and reached across the nation. But even as my professional life flourished, I still carried the scars of my past. There were moments in the quiet of the night when the memories would resurface, Grandpa's hands, his voice, the feeling of being trapped in a house with no escape. It was then that I realized just how much healing I still had left to do. Despite everything I had built, despite all the lives I had touched, the trauma I had experienced was a part of me. It would never fully go away. But I had learned to live with it, to accept it, to transform it into something that could help others. In the 1980s, I began to think more deeply about my legacy, about what I would leave behind, not just in the center or the women I had helped, but in the future of midwifery and women's health. I knew that the center would continue after I was gone, but I wanted to ensure that the knowledge and practices I had developed would continue to be passed on. I wanted the next generation of midwives to have the tools they needed to serve their communities with compassion, respect, and wisdom. With that in mind, I started the Appalachian Traditional Midwives School in 1984. It was a small initiative at first, just a handful of students, a few courses on herbs, anatomy, and childbirth, but it grew rapidly. The idea was simple: combine the knowledge of traditional midwifery with the advances of modern healthcare. Women needed to be equipped with the skills to handle any situation, from the most straightforward deliveries to the most complex emergencies. The school was designed to ensure that midwives could navigate both worlds, the world of ancient wisdom and the world of modern medicine. The students who came to the school were a mix of young women eager to learn and older women seeking to refresh their skills. Many of them had grown up with stories of midwives from their families, but now they wanted to formalize their knowledge, to learn more about anatomy, the latest medical practices, and the legal aspects of their work. The school became a beacon for midwifery in rural Appalachia, and I found myself not only teaching the next generation of midwives but also learning from them. Each student brought new perspectives, new questions, and fresh ideas. It was invigorating to see the next generation of women stepping into their power, ready to serve their communities with the knowledge I had spent my life gathering. It wasn't just the school that flourished. My personal life began to take on new meaning as well. In 1970, I met Matthew, a newly graduated doctor who had come to work at the regional hospital. He was different from anyone I had ever met. For the first time in years, I felt safe with a man. He didn't trigger the fear or the anxiety I had once felt. His patience, his respect, his understanding. They gave me the space to heal in ways I hadn't known were possible. Over the next few years, Matthew and I grew close. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared passion for helping others. In 1972, we married and I moved into a small house on the grounds of the health center. It wasn't a traditional marriage by any means. We had our own separate lives, our own separate spaces, but it worked. Our partnership wasn't defined by societal expectations or gender roles. It was based on equality and mutual support. He supported my work at the center, and I supported his work as a physician. We were two people coming together, each with our own purpose, but united in our commitment to making the world a better place for others. In 1975, we had a daughter, Clara. Clara was a joy in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had been so focused on my work, on my healing, on my mission to help other women, that I hadn't fully understood the transformative power of motherhood. But when I held Clara in my arms, I felt a deep connection to the women I had helped, to the generations of mothers who had come before me. And I understood in that moment how important it was for me to break the cycle of trauma that had plagued my family. I was determined that Clara would grow up in a home filled with love, safety, and respect, everything I had been denied as a child. Raising Clara wasn't without its challenges. I still struggled with the remnants of my trauma, and there were moments when I had to fight the urge to shelter her from the world, to keep her away from anything that might remind me of my past. But I learned slowly that the best way to heal was to let her grow, to give her the freedom to become who she was meant to be, without the weight of my fears weighing her down. By the time Clara was a teenager, the Women's Health Center had grown into a community institution, a place of empowerment, healing, and education for women. The midwives I had trained were now working in communities across Appalachia, using the skills they had learned at the school to serve women in their own regions. The legacy of the center was no longer just mine. It had become a network of women supporting women, each one carrying the torch forward, passing it to the next generation. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. From the terrified, broken girl who had no voice to the woman who had not only found her voice, but had used it to empower countless others. My journey has not been easy, and there are still days when the past threatens to catch up with me. But I've learned that healing is a lifelong process, and it is in the act of helping others that we often find our own peace. Today, at 83 years old, I look at the center and the school, at my daughter and my grandchildren, and I know that my legacy is not just in the work I've done, but in the lives I've touched. I have become more than just a survivor of trauma. I've become a force for change, a symbol of what is possible when a woman refuses to be broken by her past. I have found healing in the stories of others. I have found strength in the women I've helped, and in the women who have helped me along the way. And I've found a sense of peace that, while not perfect, is real. A peace that comes from knowing that I have lived a life that matters, a life that has made a difference. As I sit here today in my small sunlit room at the Women's Health Center, I look back on a life full of struggles, triumphs, and everything in between. My hands, though they have aged with time, still bear the marks of the work I have done, the work I was called to do. The lines on my face, too, carry the stories of a lifetime. Stories of loss, survival, and the quiet strength that comes from facing each day with resilience. I have lived long, and I have lived well, though it hasn't always been easy. The health center, now thriving and run by my daughter Clara, has become a beacon of hope for women across the Appalachian Valley. It has expanded far beyond what I could have ever imagined. What started as a simple mission to help women in my community now serves thousands, providing education, care, and support for every woman who walks through its doors. Clara, like me, is not just a doctor, but a mentor, a leader in our community, and a force for good in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelmingly difficult. Watching her carry on my work with such passion and determination fills me with a sense of peace and pride. The legacy I began is not just mine. It is hers, and it will continue for generations to come. It wasn't always easy to accept the changes, to let go of the reins and trust that others could carry the work forward. I spent so many years carrying the weight of this place, of these women, of the healing that needed to be done. But as time passed, I learned that the true measure of success isn't in how much we do ourselves, but in how much we can empower others to do. Clara and the women who now work at the center are the ones who will take it into the future, and I am confident that it will thrive long after I am gone. As for me, I have found my own peace, my own way of reconciling with the past. The trauma that once haunted me, that nearly consumed me, has faded into the background. It will always be a part of me, woven into the fabric of my existence, but it no longer defines me. I have reclaimed my life piece by piece, and with each woman I helped, each birth I facilitated, each heart I touched, I healed just a little bit more. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the scars, to let them be a testament to our survival, rather than a reminder of our pain. There were moments, especially in the early years of my work, when I wondered if I would ever truly be free of the past. The nightmares, the fear, the visceral memories, they always had a way of creeping up on me. But through the work I did, through the connections I made with other women, I began to understand that healing is not a destination. It's a journey. And the journey never truly ends. I have often reflected on what it means to be a survivor. For so many years, I identified myself by the trauma I endured, by the pain that had defined my early years. But over time, I learned that to survive doesn't just mean to endure, it means to transform. It means to take the pieces of your brokenness and create something new, something beautiful. And in that transformation, we don't just heal ourselves, we heal the world around us. Looking at Clara today, seeing the woman she has become, I know that I did not fail. I did not let my past destroy me, nor did I allow it to destroy her. She is strong, independent, and kind. She has inherited the same spirit of healing and empowerment that was passed down to me from the women who came before me. And in watching her, I see the future. A future that I will never get to experience fully, but one that I am proud to have helped shape. The women who came to me for help, the ones who trusted me with their stories, their pain, and their healing. Those women will forever be a part of me. I have helped so many, and in doing so I have helped myself. Every birth I attended, every woman who found her voice, was a reminder that we are not defined by our wounds. We are defined by how we rise from them. Now in my later years I find myself surrounded by the life I've created, the women I've mentored, the families I've helped, and the community I've built. My family too has healed, though it took time. My father, who once failed me, now stands beside me with pride. He often visits the health center bringing me flowers, telling me how proud he is of what we've accomplished. He's not the man he once was, the man who couldn't protect me, but he is a man who has learned to listen, to accept, and to support. My brothers too have changed. John, once so distant, now actively supports the center, helping with the business side of things, ensuring that we have the resources to continue our work. Anthony, who once couldn't understand the weight of what I went through, now speaks openly about the importance of women's rights, of standing up for the voiceless, of being the protector instead of the silent bystander. And then there's Matthew. Matthew, who I married in 1970, has been by my side through it all. He's not just my husband but my partner in every sense of the word. He never saw me as broken. He saw me as someone capable of great things, someone with a story worth telling. His quiet strength has been my anchor, and together, we've built a life that is rich in love, in purpose, and in service. As I sit here now in the twilight of my years, I find myself reflecting on all the lives I've touched. I see faces in the crowd, women whose births I attended, girls I helped escape abusive homes, mothers I comforted during difficult pregnancies. Each one of them carries a piece of my heart, a reminder that my work has mattered, that I have mattered. I have lived a life full of meaning, and though my journey was born from darkness, it has been shaped by light. The light of healing, of connection, of love. I may have started this journey as a broken girl, hiding in the shadows, but I end it as a woman who has found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world. A woman who has built a legacy, not just for herself, but for all the women who will come after her. And as I watch the next generation of midwives walk through the doors of the Women's House, I know that my work is not yet done. My legacy lives on in them, in Clara, in the community we've built, in the lives we continue to touch. The healing continues. To every woman who has ever felt broken, who has ever been silenced, who has ever been told that her voice doesn't matter, I see you. I hear you. And I promise you, healing is possible. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more capable than you believe. Your story is not over yet. And I am here walking beside you every step of the way.